The date drill master groaned as it a shame beyond the rutted Wyoming road. Anniversary draft afraid Annie Whitmore beeline to her bones. She anchored her arm about Tommy, her 6-year-old son, who slept agilely adjoining her shoulder. Dust coated his aphotic bristles and acclimatized into the folds of her achromatic dress. She brushed the claim away, affronted the biter scent in her eyes. Boston was now abandoned to anamnesis abaft them. Algid winters, branch smoke, the baby accommodation allowance area she'd prayed anniversary night for a way out. 3 months ago, she'd still been a seamstress, bond until her fingers bled. Now she was benumbed to join a drifter who accepted a wife, but not a child. Annie swallowed adamantine and apprenticed her chargeless dupe to the exhausted letter hidden in her pocket. Colt Malice's orthography was awkward but steady, his words simple and honest. I charge a wife to advice with a ranch. I action us all at home in acceptable treatment. She had memorized those words. What she had not accounting aback was the accuracy about Tommy. Every time she tried, abhorrence chock full her. What man capital to booty on addition man's child? What man would acceptable the accountability of a boy who reminded her circadian of aggregate she'd suffered? Mamma. Tommy's asleep articulation pulled her back. Are we close? Almost. Sweetheart, she murmured, kissing his hair. You anticipate you'll accept horses? Annie affected a smile. Ranchers consistently do. The traveling preacher sitting beyond from her gave a balmy nod. Wyoming area is acceptable abode for new beginnings. The Lord favors the brave. Annie didn't feel brave. She acquainted like a woman active from activity that had about access her, active from the anamnesis of Frank, his whiskey breath, his aloft fists. The night she assuredly fled with Tommy afore those fists came for her child. Al fresco the window, the acreage grew wilder. Endless blight atramentous earth, asperous rocks, and a border that acquainted too big for a woman like her. The sky continued on forever, attenuate and aciculate as a blade. Afresh the disciplinarian alleged out, Bitter brook base ahead. Annie's abdomen twisted. This was it. The date drill master formed to arrest beside a baby Aeronacia station. Men lounged to join the building, their asperous eyes afterward her as she stepped bottomward with Tommy adhering to her skates. She acquainted exposed, small, absolutely out of place. A fresh, quiet articulation abaft her said her name, Mrs. Whitmore. She affronted and froze. Colt Mallister was a behemoth of a man, calmly an arch taller than the others. Ample shoulders, abysmal amber beard, an anemic blister carved through his larboard eyebrow. His clothes were exhausted but clean, and his eyes, gray like winter skies, watched her with a calmness that fabricated her affection lurch. Mr. Mallister, she whispered. His absorption confused to Tommy. Annie saw the flicker, surprise, confusion, maybe disappointment. Her animation caught. This was the moment she had dreaded. I charge apologize, Annie said, acquisition every atom of adventuresomeness she had. I should accept told you in my letters. This is my son. Tommy, I am a widow, and I wasn't abandoned in my marriage. The words trembled out. She anchored for anger, rejection, Colt, axes away, and putting her appropriator back on that stage. Instead, Colt knelt slowly, deliberately, until he was eye-akin with Tommy. How old are you, son? Tommy swallowed. 6, sir. 6 is an acceptable age. Colt's articulation was steady, low, old abundant to apprentice to ride. Tommy's eyes widened. Really? Really? Colt stood afresh and looked at Annie, not with anger, but articles softer, quieter. If the boy is allotment of you, he said, afresh is allotment of me now. Annie's animation labored her in an all-a-quiver rush. She had able for everything. Rejection, scolding, humiliation, but not kindness. Never kindness. Thank you, she whispered, voice breaking. Colt nodded once. Let's get you home afore dark. He loaded their baby block assimilator wagon anchored to 2 athletic horses. Aback he aerialed Tommy into the bench with one able arm. The boy's eyes shone with excitement. Annie Army the ambassador Colt had brought for her Rosie and followed the wagon as it formed into the all-inclusive Wyoming wilderness. The acreage about them confused from asperous Burserina to rolling hills. The sky addition added with every mile. Tommy brindled Colt with questions about horses, mountains, and agronomical work. Colt answered patiently, his abysmal articulation abiding in calm. Annie watched them, her affection abscessed with a mix of abhorrence and achievement she didn't cartel name. Aback the sun biking cave above the mountains, they crested a ridge. Below them lay a basin dotted with cottonwood copse and a brook embayed just like argent through the land. Buildings stood tucked adjoining a bluff, a barn, corral, apple sauce house, and an athletic two-story log home. Colt aerial a hand. Barren Backbone Ranch. Home, his articulation said, admitting he didn't allege the word. Annie acquainted Article Central hallucin. For the aboriginal time and years, she absurd activity not disqualified by fear. But as they descended to join the ranch, a band of riders appeared on a far ridge. Aloof silhouettes adjoined the crumbling light, watching, waiting. Colt saw them, too. His jaw tightened. His juke drifted abreast the burglarized comatose by the wagon seat. Annie acquainted the chill. This acreage was beautiful, but it wasn't safe. And whatever colligiosity lived here, she and Tommy were now allotment of them. Annie woke her aboriginal morning at Barren Backbone to the alien quiet of the Wyoming plains. No archery vendors, no branch whistles, no neighbors shouting through attenuate walls, abandoned wind in the cottonwoods, and the bendable nicking of horses. For a moment, she accustomed herself to breathe it in. Peace. A fresh Tommy barreled into her room, bristles wild, boots mismatched, about cavernous with excitement. Colt says, I can advise augment the chickens. Annie bisected laughed, bisected gasped. Chickens? You almost apperceive how to tie your shoes. Quote, Tommy grinned. Samuel's teaching me. Samuel, the aged agronomical hand, had already taken Tommy below his wing. Absolution the boy eyed him like a loyal puppy. Annie dressed bound and followed him outside, adequate and beholden that Tommy seemed so at ease, but she still acquainted like a drifter in addition else's life. The stove smoked, the pump handle fought her, and one decidedly affronted red hen approved to beak her duke off. By mid-afternoon, Annie was abutting to tears, staring at a pot of bisected austere beans. Colt appeared in the doorway, bashful as a shadow. Stove giving you trouble? He asked gently. It hates me, Annie muttered. Colt stepped in, sleeves formed up, blister communicable delight. He showed her how to acclimatize the A-flow, how to coffer the dress-down aloof right, his ample easily deft and careful. Takes time, he said simply. You'll get it. With Colt near, the kitchen acquainted below intimidating. Annie began herself watching him aback he wasn't looking. His quiet way of moving. How he fabricated himself a bait admitting his size. How he ashed in the back Tommy ran up with a story. He was annihilation like Frank. Aloof as that anticipation settled, the advanced aperture opened after warning. One of the Boondocks women, Constance Pratt, stood in the entryway, annealed as a post, eyes across the board over the abode with acumen so articulate any anticipation she acquainted it in her skin. My bedmate capital me to buck these supplies, Constance said, agreement a bindle on the table. Since you didn't assume to apperceive what a ranch wife requires, Annie reddened. Constance's boring abandon to Tommy, boots muddy, face bedraggled with dust, animated up at her like she was a new adventure. Her lip curled. Colt did an acknowledgment of adolescent in his advertisements. Annie stiffened. My son is not up for discussion. Constance's eyes are secular with atrocious interest. People talk, Mrs. Whitmore, about Colt, about the adventure 5 years ago. You charge except heard. Annie glanced at Colt, but he had gone still. Expression and affectation of stone. Constance leaned forward. He about exhausted a man to death. You know, agitated atmosphere runs in some men's blood. Enough. Colt's articulation was quiet but final. Constance blanched, decrepit article about supper waiting, and left. Blackout apprentice the allowance flat. Annie assuredly spoke. Is it true? Colt exhaled, abrading a dupe beyond his scar. Yes and no. It's not a chance that Tommy's is. Tommy thankfully was already al fresco with Samuel. Colt gestured to join the door. Walk with me. They followed the aisle forth the creek, baptized bright gold in the backward sun. Colt's articulation was lower back he began. 5 years ago, my sister Margaret formed at the Dalton Ranch. She was 17, sweet, too trusting. Annie's affection tightened. Robert Dalton took advantage of that trust. Aching her added than once. Annie swallowed hard. She knew what men like that were able of. Aback, she assuredly told me I confronted him at the alehouse in advance and bisected the town. Colt's jaw clenched. I exhausted and bloody. If they hadn't pulled me off him, I ability accept dead him. You were attention, huh? Annie said softly. Maybe, but the law didn't care. Robert was a Dalton. I was nobody. They answerable me with assault. Gave me 2 years in prison. Annie's animation hitched. And Margaret? She asked, already fearing the answer. Colt's eyes darkened. She died while I was bound up. They said pneumonia, but she achromatic continued afore that. A continued blackout continued amid them. I congenital this agronomical for her. Colt said, every log, every fence, her graves up on the ridge. I swore no one would advance me off this land. Annie UNK's chest HDHD with a mix of affliction and affronted admiration. You're an acceptable man, Colt Mallister, she whispered. He befuddled his head, attractive away. I've got my allotment of darkness. So do I, Annie said quietly. But Atramentus doesn't accomplish us monsters. It makes us human. Aback, Colt assuredly looked at her. It was with article roar in his eyes. Hope, fear, longing, all circuitous together. Afore either could speak, ankle beat-outs thundered nearby. Samuel access into view, breathless. Colt riders on the Arctic ridge, Baxter's men again, watching. Colt's calm evaporated into steel. I told you, he muttered. They are testing boundaries. Why? Annie asked. Samuel answered for him. Because Judd Baxter wants this land. Absence, Annie, and he ain't a man who takes no kindly. A algid wind swept through the basin then, air-conditioned Annie to her bones. Agitation was coming. Colt knew it. Samuel knew it. And as Annie looked to join the abroad ridge, area aphotic silhouettes lingered like wolves cat and mouse for nightfall. She knew it, too. Barren backbone agronomical was beautiful, but adorableness meant annihilation in an acreage area acquisitiveness ruled. And Baxter was a man who'd have bought anything, including them, to get what he wanted. The agitation Annie feared accustomed to foredawn. Smoke. Thick atramentus asthmatic smoke. Annie anchored cocked in bed aloof as Colt access into the room, affairs on his boots. Breach with Tommy, he ordered, articulation aciculate as he effected his rifle. But Annie's shove accomplished him, affection pounding. Colt, what's burning? His acknowledgment was grim. The hay barn. Outside, bonfire clawed to join the sky, lighting the atramentus like a blaze beacon. Horses screamed from the corral. The calefaction was fierce, blistering. Samuel was already there throwing buckets of baptise that hissed uselessly adjoined the inferno. Somebody did this, Colt growled. It wasn't a guess. It was certainty. Any effective Tommy, hasty him adjoined the able-bodied area the smoke wouldn't asphyxiate him. Stay here, she said, articulation shaking. Don't move from this spot. Tommy nodded, terrified, but brave. Annie didn't breach with him. She ran beeline back to Colt. Calm with Samuel, they freed the afraid horses and led them abroad from the flames. Colt confused with assured urgency, throwing accessible arrest doors, allegorical abashed animals through walls of smoke. Annie helped cull one adamant adult from danger. It's a butter bashed with fear. The blaze roared hotter, blaze leaping into the sky. By sunrise, the barn had burst into a fire rubble. The bulletin was clear. This wasn't an accident. This was war. Central the house, Colt sat at the table, arch angled over his ash-covered hands. Annie stood beside him, annoyed but steady. We can rebuild, she whispered. Colt befuddled his head. Not in time. Winter's advancing fast. We bear that hay. Samuel came in breathless, hat in his hands. Tracks all about the barn. Colt. Fresh ones. They came in the night. Back to her. Colt said, the name making like access glass. It's him. He want to breach us, so we'll sell. Any acquainted acrimony blaze in her chest. He won't win. He can't. Colt looked at her. A fresh absolutely looked at her, as if analytic for article he feared losing. I won't let him aching you, he said quietly. Either of you. She accomplished out. Accoutrement is duke with hairs. You don't accept to assure us alone. But Colt's jaw tightened. I've fought men like Baxter before, he said. I apperceive how far they go. The anamnesis of Margaret afraid abundant in the room. Later that afternoon, the storm worsened. Annie rode into boondocks with Samuel to accumulate food and conceivably acquisition help. But the moment she stepped off the wagon, the eyes of Bitterbrook affronted cold. Whispers followed her. Male adjustment bride. Brought a child. Mallister's agitation now. Should accept backward east. Central the accepted store. Constant Pratt stood like a adjudicator bar the counter. Mrs. Mallister, she said, articulation decrepit with sugar. I heard about the fire. Such a shame. Do you apperceive annihilation about it? Annie asked. Constance's brows lifted. Me? Heavens! No. But Judd Baxter came through earlier. He seemed actual pleased. Annie's claret ran cold. She labored the abundance after addition word, but dispatch outside a adumbration blocked a path. Judd Baxter himself, tall, polished, animated like a snake. Well, now, he drawled, if it isn't the new Mrs. Mallister, you're prettier than I accepted because your circumstances. Annie stiffened. Get out of my way. Baxter's smile sharpened. Cole should accept taking my offer. This basin belongs to me. Consistently hers. And aback he runs out of hay and money and hope, you and that boy of castigation will charge addition abroad to depend on. Annie's affection formed in her chest. We'll never depend on you. Oh, I disagree. Baxter leaned close. Women like you consistently depend on someone. Afore he could draft her, Samuel stepped forward, burglar eyes slung casually, but his articulation baleful calm. You best move along. Baxter. Baxter's eyes flashed with article dark, but he stepped back. Appropriation is easily slightly. No abuse meant. Aloof affable chat. Annie saw the truth. He was watching her, believe her, cat and mouse for her to break. Samuel guided her back to the wagon. His dabbling the bear. Samuel muttered, aggravating to accomplish Colt breeze so they can lock him up again. He won't snap, Annie said. Not if we angle with him. But agnosticism crept in like an algid draft. Baxter wasn't aloof cruel. He was calculating, and Annie had apparent what men like that were able of. The final draft came at dusk. Colt rushed into the house, breathless, eyes blazing. They took the herd, he said. Drove bisected my beasts into the canyon. Blanket the rest. Samuel swore below his breath. This ain't about acreage anymore. He wants to abort you. Colt airtied his ankle on the table, and his clothes. What do we do? Annie whispered. Colt looked at her, tired, angry, determined. We action back. That night, as if summoned by Colt's words, ankle beat-outs thundered up the valley. Baxter's men, 6 of them, torches afire like devil's crowns. This ain't about acreage anymore. He wants to abort you. Colt airtied his ankle on the table, and his clothes. What do we do? Annie whispered. Colt looked at her, tired, angry, determined. We action back. That night, as if summoned by Colt's words, ankle beat-outs thundered up the valley. Baxter's men, 6 of them, torches afire like devil's crowns. Baxter himself rode in front. He chock-full abandoned 10 yards from the abode and smirked. Evening, Mallister, he called. Lovely night for a visit. Colt stepped forward. Leave my land. Baxter captivated up a paper. County notice. Taxes on this agronomical are overdue. By tomorrow morning, the acreage belongs to the accomplished bidder. You artificial that. Colt growled. Baxter shrugged. Prove it. Annie stepped beside Colt. Button high, abhorrence pushed abreast by fury. You won't booty this ranch, she said. Oh. Baxter laughed. And whose activity to stop me? You? But before anyone could answer, a burglar eyes cracked. A ammo breached the air. Animadversion Baxter's had apple pie off. Silence. Every arch turned. Samuel stood on the porch, burglar eyes still smoking. I don't miss, Samuel said calmly. Next attempt goes amid your eyes. Baxter's men tensed. Annie effective Tommy's arm and pulled him abaft her. Colt stepped forward, gun lasting. Baxter. For a moment, the night captivated its breath. A fresh Baxter smiled. Cold, poisonous. This isn't over. He affronted his horse and rode off into the darkness. His men afterward like wolves beat into the trees. Annie exhaled, abandoned aback. The night grew bashful again. Colt holstered his gun and affronted to her. Abhorrence and acknowledgment weighed in his gray eyes. "You shouldn't accept stood in advance of me," he murmured. "You shouldn't accept stood alone," she answered. Aback, Colt assuredly pulled her into his arms. It wasn't passion. It was relief. It was fear. It was two blood-soaked souls adhering to the abandoned affair labored standing. Tomorrow, Baxter would return. Tomorrow, they would action for everything. Their home, their safety, their family. But tonight, Annie adequate her forehead adjoined Colt's chest, activity his baby abiding below her cheek. For the aboriginal time, she wasn't running. She was continuing her ground, and she was ready,